Hello and welcome to episode 9 of the IQ Business AI podcast. We've really missed you and we hope that you've missed us. We're really excited to give you a bit of a roundup of all things AI. There's been lots happening. It's a nice way to start this podcast because there's always been lots happening. But today we'll be joined in the studio by a very welcome colleague and guest, Karl-Heinz Wessinger. It would be lovely just to hear from you, Karl, a little bit of an introduction about you and your interests and your role in IQ Business before we get into the meat of today's podcast.
Thanks, Tim. Really happy to be joining you on the podcast. Thanks for the invite. My background is in technology, mostly software development. So I have a keen interest in AI. I have for a long time. I still remember studying all about neural networks when I was at varsity. That seems like an age ago, and clearly the technology is advanced. My role at IQbusiness is I'm a managing partner, so I look after quite a few of our business units, and I really have an interest, in the podcast. I think just to understand how AI impacts our business, how we can help our clients, how it impacts our clients, and the industries we work in, and obviously the world in general. I think it's very topical to understand, how the technology is evolving. So thanks again.
Really wonderful to have you. And I think one of the things that's on all of our clients' minds at the moment, and it's been from the start, is legislation, data privacy. How do we protect our data? So a lot of the conversation today, I think, is going to be centering around that. So let's jump right in. I think the big news has been, or one of the big news items has been that the EU has finally passed a bit of legislation where they look at regulating the use of AI. And as we know in South Africa from other acts like POPI, and GDPR, the European Act, we tend to see that South Africa lags our European counterparts by a few years. So what we've seen in Europe is probably to some extent going to forecast where we see the South African legislators go. Josh, it'd be lovely to hear some of your views. Talk us through this piece of legislation that's been passed, how our European counterparts tackling this problem, and let's delve into what we think this means for us.
Sure, definitely. So the EU AI Act was, as you say, passed, and as I understand it, likely to be enforced from next month. And the main takeaway really is a risk-based approach, like you mentioned, which is carving out the landscape between unacceptable risk applications of AI, high risk and low risk applications. And when we talk about certain unacceptable risks, which are forbidden from the perspective of the EU or the EU AI Act, it's mostly social scoring systems that try to either using certain indicators of social behavior or inferred personality characteristics, make some sort of prediction of that on that basis. And such systems are sort of banned outright. And it's also mostly biometric, certain types of biometric systems, particularly biometric categorization. So what the EU Act does make a good job of doing, at least, is understanding that there's different levels of use of biometric data, from authentication to categorization to identification. And some of those are okay according to the EU Act, and logically it makes sense, like biometric authentication, which is simply something that we've had for a while, I think made popular or made more widespread during COVID. Access control through facial recognition software, which the aim is simply to authenticate a user at some particular location that they are authorized to access that location. That's all fine, but other uses like categorization on the basis of biometric data, using things like what they call natural data, like eye gaze movements and similar such natural data, that's not allowed. So there's a bit of a nuanced view between what's allowed and what's not allowed. But I think at a high level, I think what it matters to, especially to businesses, is, or why businesses should really care about this, is what sort of checks and balances and processes they need to put in place if they are developing or want to adopt the development of some sort of AI product or service that is deemed high risk, such as in recruitment, or as one example on top of my mind, that they adapt the sort of safeguards and governance best practices that they may already have in place, that from related data exercises or data software development engineering exercises, but some that have to be now carved out because LLMs or large language models function a little differently from standard software, given that it's probabilistic, not deterministic, etc. So that was something we will talk about later in terms of the industrialization of AI, and I think that's quite important about what we have there and what we don't. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's where we are with the EU AI Act.
Okay, so maybe just a couple of things for our listeners there. I think a few things jump out at me. The first is that there probably is an issue of categorization and deeper definitions that we need. I can think that biometrics is now going to be expanded to things like voice prints and face prints and all of these things that have played out. And really, I think one of the kinds of things that I understand this legislation to be prohibiting are, you can't go and use my Facebook data now in a large unstructured model together with an LLM to work out whether or not to grant me a loan. So social scoring, which has actually been something that a lot of credit providers have really wanted to get their hands on for a long time, more nuanced ways of assessing risk seem like they're out, which is quite interesting. But I think it's a response largely to people's sense of being violated by AI. People don't like the idea that you can watch a video of me or see what I'm doing online and suddenly come up with, you know, sophisticated social scores, information that I didn't overtly consent to providing. And I think that we're going to continue to see kind of a social backlash from consumers around using stuff which I did not overtly, all of my data, everything associated with me, I did not overtly give permission to be used. I think that's the first observation. The second, which is a really interesting one, is that we find ourselves in almost like in a conflict between the rate of legislation and the rate of technology. So you've got legislation being developed at a snail's pace because legislators need to go through large rounds of consensus and public opinion and white papers and whatever else. But the truth is that this technology is evolving far faster. So I wonder where that will leave us in the future if we're going to have to get to pieces of legislation that are more generalized and less specific to cater for principles rather than specific use cases because of this like rapidly evolving substrate. I think it's going to be an interesting one. And then just my final observation that I'd make and be interesting to hear your views, Karl, is that this legislation, to my mind, seems to have missed the mark. It's great. It goes as fast as kind of banning things like whether or not I'm going to give somebody a credit score based on information they haven't consent to. But there's a whole layer of AI driven by LLMs and other branches of technology in the artificial intelligence stable right now, not just LLMs. Things that are helping with the design of protein folding. It's been happening for a long time. Advances in technologies like CRISPR and the use of, there's even an LLM for CRISPR now. For our audience, CRISPR is a gene splicing technology that allows you to insert particular genes into a protein, into a strand of DNA to produce new proteins. This stuff has got incredible application in nefarious applications like building out bioweapons, and even where you may or may not believe some of the conspiracies around what happened with COVID-19 happening in Wuhan or coming out of Wuhan. But where's the legislation talking about these big existential risks? It seems to be more worried about a response to sort of a social backlash than to some of the really big pieces of let's call it like existential risk that humanity might face as in response to the advent of this tech.
Yeah, Tim, I mean, I actually think it's way too early. I think the EU is jumping the gun on implementing this kind of regulation. I mean, if I think about it, the premise of the regulation is that they want to, support innovation in the EU. I think regulating this early is going to get in the way of innovation. Ultimately, the elements of having to, for example, label AI work, market as being generated by AI, that's quite handy. Where does it go? I suppose it's interesting. Now we're going to have a little label that says made by AI. Does that automatically also then infer a copyright on the maker of that AI? The elements of having to, I think what is quite useful, I think, is for them to kind of publish. Everybody that creates a GP AI, so general purpose AI, has to kind of publish the summaries of the data that they used, and they have to comply with copyright. Now, it sounds good, but I actually don't know how this is going to help or how it's going to be enforced. Ultimately, copyright laws in EU already exist. So what does this legislation actually do to enhance that? How are they going to practically fast-track innovation or improve innovation when you have to submit summaries to some regulator that has to go and review your model? And if they deem it to be high risk, they can then pull in more detailed performance evaluations of your model, maybe looking at the weightings. I really don't understand why they're doing this at this point in time. As you indicated, there are maybe high-risk areas, and I think the way they should have approached it is to deal with the high-risk areas first, rather than trying to create a general-purpose AI policy and try to regulate, because I think it's just going to get in the way of innovation and business development.
I agree with you, and I think they've also missed another mark. And I must admit, I haven't trawled through the entire piece of legislation, but from what I understand, very little has been done to regulate the makers of these models. So if you listen to all of the, I suppose, all of the real academics in the space, the people in the superalignment teams and the people who've been calling for halts in the development of the models, those people are saying that we need to have better ways of understanding what these things do. We know that we're never going to be able to turn them into we're never going to fully deconstruct them, but there are advances being made on that front. But where's the regulation that says we need to watch OpenAI, or we need to ensure that the providers of these technologies are regulated? This is much more about the application and very little about building the nuclear bomb itself. So interesting, and I agree with you. I think probably people feeling they need to jump in and show that they're regulating, but possibly not doing enough. Josh, if I missed the mark there, is the regulation on the models themselves?
No, look, I haven't read the 400-page document myself completely yet, but I think you're on the mark there. I think one point you made about the necessary or the inevitable lag between policy and the technology, I think really is reflected here, because much of what they're talking about, or what they're trying to legislate when it comes to social scoring, biometrics, and other such technologies, it's actually, although in common with some of the underlying technology that powers LLMs and LMMs, almost a little bit from about 4 or 5 years ago, when this tech really exploded through transformer models and other visual transformer models, CNNs, or convolutional neural networks, and it's sort of catching up to that, and it sort of doesn't focus enough on the foundational models and generative AI specifically, and text-to-video models and the impact that might have. So when that, I mean, we're in that world right now, and in 1 or 2 years, we probably see further developments on that space and further risks, of course, as well as opportunities. Will the AI Act have to be then revised to like a 2.0 to account for this? Or will it be too long between the time of that being drafted and then eventually approved because of the red tape? Who knows? But I do like that there is at least some North Star roughly with regard to guiding businesses and others. But I do agree that more ownership should be placed on the creators of these foundational models, and how are they steering the industry, really, because a lot of emphasis is placed on what they call the provider here. Often those are businesses or companies that are using these foundational models, and of course they are building these business pipelines and engaging with business, and the ultimate responsibility should be on them when they're putting these pieces together. But to help steer the overall bigger picture of these foundations, I think some sort of policy is also needed there.
That does seem to me like a piece of legislation that says, be careful how you use the nuclear bomb, but build whatever nuclear bombs you want to. So it's it seems to be aimed at a strange place. Anyway, as fascinating as legislation is, let's move on to the creators of the foundational models. So GPT-4o was launched a couple of weeks ago, O being Omni to describe its ability to move from just text to video, audio, as we move towards what we've been talking about for a long time on this pod, multimodality. Eventually, we expect that we'll have a multimodally trained model. This seems to be a step towards this, and possibly under the hood, a collection of models, a model of models rather than just one model. But first impressions, who's played with it? What do we think of 4o?
Yeah, it's a lot faster than GPT-4, at least the front-end interface, which I think they have touted themselves in their demo. The increase in speed, I think it's about 30 to 30% quicker. It's a lot better at data analysis as well than the previous version, makes a lot less hallucinations or errors there. And one extra feature which I thought few weeks ago set apart Microsoft Copilot from GPT was the ability to export and import files from the Microsoft suite into the ChatGPT environment, which Copilot is natively integrated to, therefore an advantage. But what GPT has done now is allowed free users who do register, but nevertheless free users on the free tier rather of ChatGPT, not the plus tier, to at least be able to upload files, which they didn't have the ability to do previously. They weren't able to upload files, and as well as the ability to connect Microsoft OneDrive and Google Drive folders completely within the ChatGPT ecosystem. And often you'll see, if you ask for a question or prompt, if you prompt it, and the end result is a table or something that can be exported into a CSV, it gives you that option now as well. So I think a lot of focus went into the user experience more so than the underlying tech. I think there have been speed improvements. It's a larger model technically in terms of parameter size. Because it's not an open source model, we don't know what the actual model looks like from an architecture point of view. But others have attempted to create similar multimodal models, and researchers have proposed that it can't be that vastly different in terms of what these best open source researchers and developers can develop. And it essentially is, from what we can gather, it probably is one neural network at the end of the day that's being through various connectors ingesting and then outputting text, video, and speech. But the fact that it's one neural network before it had to do call separate models, which made it slower and added more latency. That's one of the reasons why it's quicker. But one of the big impacts that will have, not just on user experience, I think, is on if it's possible, and I'm not sure if this is how they intend on training these models going forward. But if you can actually train these models multimodally, then it opens up the bandwidth in terms of what information you can train a model on and how much it can learn. Because with just text, there's only so much it can learn through so many epochs of training, etc., without scaling the compute further. While if you can train a model omnimodally through speech, text, video, then it's like, I think an example you like to give is how much data a child sees visually within their early experiences. Often that's not just people speaking or just text only, it's actually engaging with the world through vision and text and speech, etc., multimodally. And so if they're able to train these models this way, then it could open up a lot of avenues for the sophistication of these models. So first impressions for me is it's positive, more on the user experience side, but I do like what they've done.
Yeah, I agree with you, Josh. I mean, what you said kind of rings true. I mean, what really stood out for me is the development of the model. I mean, maybe a couple of big things. Number one is I think the speed is vitally important, and we've seen a huge increase in speed, probably almost tenfold increase. I think that's really helpful because any application developer, any use case that uses OpenAI is going to require speed. I think one of the issues in the past with 4 and 3.5 going back has been the response time. Most applications are either web applications or otherwise. Dealing with these response times really isn't a good user experience. And I think if you want to build an app, you need something faster. So I think the fact that they've addressed speed is really good. The second thing is, they've increased the context window to 128K. That's quite a big jump. So again, being able to provide more context, more input, I think it was a requirement, to make it omni-channel. But putting that in and allowing more context in, I think gives us better results. And ultimately, I think what they have achieved is higher throughput, high performance, but without a degradation or loss in accuracy or performance of the model. So I think that's really, they are on the right track. So I'm really, really looking forward to what the next set of models already are going to look like. But that's a huge improvement over the last one.
I mean, the speed question is one we've debated so much over the period of this last couple of years talking about AI. I still think we're a long way off getting to the point where you can build enterprise software on top of this. I mean, it's faster, but the clever trick they did was sort of writing the words out in the beginning as a way of sort of hiding the slow speeds. Even if you look at where GPT 4.5 is now, and you think about throughput rates and automation pipes and things like that, where you need to be running hundreds of transactions a second, we are still orders of magnitude away from really scaling the stuff into production level software. And I think that when we reflect on the final half of this conversation today, I think speed still remains probably the biggest constraint to why there isn't mainstream adoption of AI yet. It's coming, but we're still some way from that. Interestingly enough, about the new models, Josh, I actually didn't know that the model was truly multimodal at its core. I thought it was sort of a model of models, but that's very interesting. It could become a breakthrough. And I did read that just in this last week, there's been sort of a well-hidden announcement in OpenAI's literature that they are now training the next generation model. So the secretive GPT-5 that may have the Q-star algorithm in it and be able to handle reasoning. It seems like they're now setting about the training of that model. And I guess it's anyone's guess as to whether or not it's going to deliver something as a breakthrough. Because I think we've seen incremental gains on the models right now, rather than slight speed in performances, less degradation of performance around hallucinations, some multimodality, but fundamentally sort of an evolution of the same thing. And I think everyone's now really anticipating the kind of the next big breakthrough. I just want to touch on something which keeps me up at night, just because it's interesting, not because it's scary, is whether or not, like, what is the nature of this organization, OpenAI? It's quite an interesting organization. I mean, Sam Altman used to work at Y Combinator, and in a podcast that I think a lot of us listen to, David Sachs recently said that, let's call it for what it is. There's a mass exodus of senior leadership at OpenAI at the moment. I think very notably coming out of the super alignment team. They are the team that are meant to be looking after AI safety. If we remember a few months ago, Sam Altman was fired. He did manage to get 85% of his staff to support him coming back. But there's also a big financial incentive for that to happen, because they've all got vesting share schemes coming up around the corner. But it seems that there's something beneath the surface here around the culture of OpenAI, potentially Sam Altman himself. Some people leaving that alignment team saying that he's not all that straight shooter. But all I really wonder is, does this business survive? Or are we going to see the emergence of like another big OpenAI coming in the wake? Because an organization built on a shaky social foundation inevitably fails. And at the same time, you've got businesses like Apple doing massive deals to replace Siri with OpenAI's ChatGPT. Thoughts, comments? What do we make of this mass exodus of senior leadership? Does it mean anything for OpenAI? Is Sam going to take this business to where it needs to go, or they're going to have to fire him and put in a proper corporate manager?
I think it's obviously a continuation or exacerbation of the trend we saw when he was initially fired, and some of the rumblings around productization. Is it moving too quickly versus the control of these models, the build of these models, and the building of guardrails rather, and governance and safe use and responsible use, etc. And I think it's he being Sam Altman and Satya Nadella, the Microsoft CEO. I think they're both on the product mindset to try, or the commercial mindset. They see that on a gold mine of technology that can potentially transform industry and enhance productivity, etc. And they've really, I mean, the Copilot is an example of that. It's everywhere. It's embedded in so many different ecosystems under different names and in different for different use cases, from security to otherwise. And others like Ilya Sutskever, who was on the OpenAI team, also resigned. I think the more of the, I guess, use oversimplification, the less business minded and the more technical development staff there, who are aware of what some of the unintended risks may be and what the capabilities are of these models, perhaps a little bit more concerned about, or more willing to hit the brakes and go a bit slower than what they're going at currently. And I think it comes down to the issue of hallucinations and evaluations, and we will probably get to that in our last topic that we'll discuss around the industrialization of this. But in my view, it's inevitable that we'll probably end up with other players in the ecosystem that hopefully gives us the ability to choose, to have options to adopt the different technologies because of the different values or the different inbuilt guardrails that they put in. Anthropic, I've recently started using their models. They developed the Claude models, and that's the team that, or the company that Jan Lake joined, who was part of the alignment team at Microsoft, and so super alignment team, and resigned. And they very impressive model just from a pure development or use case point of view. And it'll be good to see other players in the field succeed. What I'm worried about is the sort of spillover effect, this sort of race towards productization of the technology that isn't quite there yet can bring. And I think the actual effect can be seen in some competitors, ironically, and not in OpenAI directly. I think if you look at Google Gemini, one of the next things that people are trying to bring together is sort of search and generative AI, sort of internet search and generative AI into like one sort of seamless tool. Because maybe just to clarify, not many people know that traditionally a large language model cannot see what's on the internet because it's been trained on what's on the internet from a training point of view, and it was capped at a certain point in time. But from a user experience point of view, we know that users want latest information or outdated information. So what they've done is given large language models a tool, essentially a browser tool, to go and scrape some of the results on the internet, bring it back into its context window, and then it answers the question with what's in its context window and what's in its general sort of memory or database. But going back to the point, Gemini has started to release the AI results on Google's. When you search on Google for something, it'll also have an AI-generated answer. And they've been hitting potholes left, right, and center on social media with some mistakes that it's been making because, I mean, the big one that comes to mind was someone who asked about the cheese that was sliding off their pizza. So Google replied, you should put some glue in the cheese sauce. And someone did some digging and found out that the internet has content on real food as well as food that's created when one does set designs and advertisements for food. I think they call it like food engineering, where they actually do put things like glue and plastic in food to make it look good for photography, etc. And it probably exemplifies that what we talk about garbage in, garbage out. I mean, a lot of good information on the internet, a lot of rubbish on the internet as well. And a model unable to tell the difference is sort of dangerous. And perhaps it's too quick to start putting it in front of people's faces right away. And I think that's something to consider. Yeah.
It also just highlights that these are not models of the world. They're not models that can reason at any level. The sense of reasoning that we get is just an emergent property of language that was created on top of reasoning rather than any foundational ability to reason.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder whether Sam's behavior is really just akin to having started the organization with this sort of open AI mentality. I mean, the intention was always to create AI for the good, and maybe it was an open source mentality, like we'll open source things. But I think having pursued a commercial agenda now, and I think Sam's got a lot of pressure. He's got a very valuable organization. I think there's a lot of expectation about what he's going to do, and I'm sure there are competitors that are now starting to catch up. So the real question is how big is that moat? And I think that'll somehow, in some ways, also potentially deepen who stays and who leaves OpenAI. We've seen Elon Musk's new XAI raise $6 billion. Elon has always taken on big projects, and he's been very, very effective. He keeps his promises. When he says he's going to do something, he does it. So, if I'd be looking, Google's a powerful player. Microsoft backing Sam and OpenAI as a powerful player. So it's going to be an interesting space to see who comes out in front. I always wonder what is the actual head start that OpenAI has in this regard. The sad part is, in some ways, they had a big head start, and in terms of, I suppose, reputation, going to market had a really strong brand. I think the real risk that Sam poses in the way he's behaving, because he does seem to say things in a very roundabout way. Sometimes it's very difficult to understand exactly what he's getting at. So I think the bigger risk here is reputation for OpenAI, and associated with it is Microsoft. And as much as Satya, I think, backs Sam, the question is really, how far will that go? Before Microsoft feels the pressure. We saw Google with Gemini and some of the faux pas they had, really pull back on some of the safety measures. So that's important. I don't know how you mix the iteration and the safety effectively. There's got to be a really, really good way to manage the output for every version that they put out there. So yeah, I think Sam's got a difficult job. I think it'd be helpful for him to be more direct and more honest in some ways. I think seeing the competitors come up is creating pressure.
But if I get to put my bet down for the future, I say OpenAI is not winning this race in 5 years' time, and Sam Altman is no longer in charge. So we can go and revisit that in 5 years' time. But I think you raise a you raise a really interesting point about Elon Musk in particular. And if you think about the evolution of these models, what sets them apart? We've always said, where are the moats? The models converge to the same thing. The moats are data. Who has got the proprietary data set that nobody else has? And the answer, in my mind, is not YouTube. It's not Google, because that data is available to everyone. They've kind of given away that golden asset. The answer is the millions of hours of video that have been recorded. You've got training data to build an architecture of the world, a model of the world, like humans do when they observe it and see it play out. So I definitely place a bet on XAI as being like a serious contender in the future of this, with a model breakthrough based on vision data rather than on anything else. So interesting times. Okay, Copilot and PCs, back to where we started, and to wrap us up and take us home. We spoke about all of the anxiety around data and where does my data go. In our roadshows around the country, running AI masterclasses, Josh and I always get the question right at the end after you've done all the cool stuff, where does my data go, and who's got my data? And I don't believe that OpenAI is not training the models on my data. So where are we with that? Edge compute, MPUs, Copilots, and PCs. Josh, won't you take us through some of that?
Sure, it's quite a recent announcement from Microsoft, and going to be hitting the stores quite soon. I think 6 months. I'm not sure about South Africa, maybe somewhere around there, a few months after that. But the sort of combination of what they're calling Copilot plus PCs, they hope, Microsoft that is, that this will reinvigorate the PC, because the MacBook has really obviously dominated the market of personal computing for about 10, 15 years. And so they're hoping that Copilot now, combining it with the computer, can bring about a new resurgence in that market for them. And what it essentially introduces, a few things. One is Copilot really takes the center seat here. There's even a button, like we have a Microsoft Windows key button. There's also a little Copilot button on those computers as well, bring up Copilot. And the idea is really to augment our workflows with an AI observer. And it sounds a little scary, but the idea is that if an AI through a webcam, through your microphone, can receive input from you continuously, not just from you through instructions, but through what's on your screen. So to be able to see if you're working on some code, being able to actually see what's on your desktop, what other apps you have open. If you're playing a game like Minecraft or Elden Ring or whatever it is you're playing, it can actually play with you or see what you're doing, make recommendations of what to do. So it's almost like having an assistant that's ever present, but hopefully the ability to turn it off as well, which we'll get to in terms of the privacy issue that it seems to have opened. But the NPU, or neural processing unit, is one of the next stages in developing some sort of processing unit, ideally created for processing neural networks, or doing matrix multiplications, of which neural networks do, is essentially, and well geared for large language models and other generative AI. And the key thing here is sort of the on-device processing, which could be partially an answer to data privacy concerns that you mentioned. So whenever people use these tools, they often ask the question, where's the data going? And you can, even though you may turn off the retrain option on OpenAI front end, or you can opt out through other mechanisms, et cetera, et cetera. You don't really know for sure, because you're using an API at the end of the day. If you're using if you're not using completely open source, like a Llama model or anything else like that that's deployed, you don't really have full visibility, and that sort of black box makes people anxious because of data privacy leaks and the rest. So they thought that if some of the processing of really confidential information can happen on device, instead of being transferred to the cloud where it's processed, that would be at least partially an issue in addressing the privacy concerns that individuals have. So it's sort of the on-device processing of especially what they call a new feature calling recall. So that's you can think of it, if you have the feature on, a constant screenshotting of your desktop, so that you can time travel back and ask a large language model or a large multimodal model has access to these screenshots, and you can engage with it to ask questions across time, etc. Now, I mean, that does open, I mentioned, a can of worms with regard to data privacy, because, I mean, one could be looking at a lot of documents that are third-party applications where the data is of a high confidentiality index, or it's really confidential information. In other words, does Microsoft have the right to take these screenshots and collect this information, which it probably doesn't. So in a nutshell, yeah, we probably will see these different computers in the next 6 months or so, and we'll see how it does. I do like the feature of Copilot being almost an ever-present assistant. I think for coding, development, video gaming, content creation, it'll be invaluable. Maybe some other ancillary streams like, who knows, therapy and emotional support and other such uses of LLMs, perhaps. But as we've said before, sort of a double-edged sword between opportunities and risk there, because there's a lot of questions it opens about data privacy.
Yeah, Josh, I think this is really a glimpse of what's going to be coming in the future. I mean, the fact that we're starting to put NPUs, neural processing units, into PCs is just a start. I think in some ways it's maybe not unusual to see Microsoft pushing this. The PC market has been flat for a long time. One way to do that is to launch a new product, which is essentially what they've done, with a new chipset, essentially that you either have the AI capability or you don't. So there isn't an upgrade option here other than to swap in your laptop. And they haven't made this available on PCs because I suppose on PCs an upgrade would be much easier. So I can see this driving PC sales. I can see this the ecosystem that Microsoft has with their OEM partners, Dell and the like, is really coming to the fore here. I do think the model is going to work and is going to be what we're going to see in the future. But I think we should see this for what it is. I think Microsoft is trying to drive hard into the PC market, like you said, get some market share back from Apple. And this ability to have NPUs on the laptop is great, actually. Funny enough, they're not NVIDIA or AMD or Intel, they're Qualcomm. So again, is Microsoft backing a different horse? We know that NVIDIA is probably buying up all the silicon in the world at the moment, and they're competing in their own market, but fantastic results again. So is Microsoft trying to kind of back a separate competitor, make sure that there's some balance in the market? Again, once you have a powerful leader like NVIDIA, it's useful maybe for Microsoft to be investing in another chip maker and see if they can do that through the PC and the laptop.
So our stock pick is throw your money in any direction that's vaguely aimed at somebody who produces chips, and some of that's going to stick. And we are not a financial service provider. Don't actually take that advice, but maybe do, but maybe don't. Okay, very interesting times to come. I think to wrap us up, I mean, we started this year feeling incredibly bullish about the state of AI. Everybody was saying that this is the year that AI is going to go mainstream and it's going to start to revolutionize the organization. What are our lived experiences? We're in June. I don't see it anywhere. I see much more hype. I see lots of people talking. Who's getting it right, and why hasn't it gone mainstream yet? Or have I missed the mark here? Has it gone mainstream? What are you seeing, Karl, in your clients?
Well, I don't think it's gone mainstream at all yet, but I do think more and more people are experimenting and trying things out. I think there's enough interest from enterprises to understand what AI could do, especially generative AI. We know that predictive analytics, we know machine learning has had a long history already. Data has been well used for things like credit scoring, risk assessments. So finding the new use cases, I think, is something that organizations are happy to experiment with right now, but I would say it's really experimental. I haven't and can't see any organization yet going mainstream with anything AI. The use cases haven't been properly built out yet, and potentially even the return on investment isn't necessarily clear. And getting back to the safety concerns, unless organizations are comfortable that they've got their own safety measures built into those LLMs, I think it's going to be difficult for them to make anything that's consumer-facing at this point in time.
There was an interesting paper published around where AI will disrupt first, and the two dimensions that were spoken about were the extent to which jobs are complemented by AI, and then effectively the extent to which there's inertia against the adoption of AI. And I think we're really going to see, other than some of the technical challenges around, and we spoke about it earlier, but throughput rates still a really massive problem. Throughput rates and costs are still a big issue. People don't want to be disrupted by AI. That's the other big thing that we don't talk about. So, organizations that run large numbers of lawyers and organizations, law firms, they really seem to be highly complemented by AI, potentially replaced, but there's just no way they're going to go gently to that good night. So I think we're going to start to see a lot of social friction against the adoption of AI, which will buy us a little bit of time while the technology itself starts to stabilize. But I'm now thinking that this AI revolution is going to take longer than we think to get into the mainstream. So maybe it'll be slow, and then finally quick at the very end.
Yeah, just my thoughts on that. I think the throughput rates are one thing, definitely. I think it does depend on the use case, because in some cases you can have an AI agent making, if it takes 5 minutes to make a decision, that's still 80% time saving, because a human took 5 hours to do it. You don't need everything to be high velocity per second. In some cases you do need for banks processing invoices and the rest. So it does depend on the use cases, but that's one of the things. You mentioned Qualcomm, you mentioned NVIDIA, they're trying to solve through faster chips, etc. My opinion is that the two biggest blockers, you mentioned one already, Karl, is sort of the hesitancy from organizations from privacy, data privacy point of view. Maybe not hesitancy, but just a bit of a wait and see in terms of, let's not jump straight for it, because we may be setting off a booby trap if we just taking our IP and copying and pasting it everywhere and anywhere. So maybe there's some of that. But my opinion is it's sort of going through a similar trajectory that machine learning went through 10 years ago, when we had the sort of explosion of people using Kaggle, which is like a data competition platform, and where many data scientists learn their trade. And similarly, the learnings that have had to come out of that long struggle is what they developed eventually, which was ML ops. How do you evaluate whether a model is good enough, a probabilistic model is good enough? How do you evaluate if it's ranking well enough? How do you monitor things because of data drift and the rest? And what we're dealing here with the LLMs, in my opinion, it's an evaluation problem, because imagine if you ask an LLM to summarize a candidate CV, you can ask an LLM twice and they can summarize it in different ways. But how do you say that's correct? You can't say that's a correct summary and that's incorrect. You can say one's maybe more grounded than the other. You have to actually come up with different metrics and different ways of evaluating an output that just gets extremely free text, as opposed to just a binary 0 or 1 or a regression problem. So that's where LLM ops comes to play. It's an extremely new thing, but it's essentially developing those principles and best practices and underlying software to support the sort of monitoring and maintenance of these highly probabilistic systems that can change over time, can change when foundation models update, etc. And I think that's going to take about a year or two, but I see not this year as being the year of it capturing the imagination, if it hasn't already last year, but definitely the year of experimentation and where governance starts taking roots. And I think perhaps in the next year or two, we'll see the actual industrialization start with those highly exposed and highly complementary industries, telemarketing, contact center, help desks, etc.
So some closing advice to our clients. We think that there might be a little bit of room here just to think about your AI strategy. Don't panic. Get it into your roadmaps, understand the risks, understand the opportunities, get the metrics in place. This is going to be a thing in the future, but it's probably still going to take a little bit of time, and move carefully. And of course, don't ignore your people. Any organization that needs any organizational change hinges around people and making sure that they are willing participants and advocates, and make sure that your operating model in your business is one that supports innovation, as Karl's mentioned, experimentation, makes people feel safe, and focuses on customer value. It's been wonderful to have you. Thank you very much for listening to episode 9, and great to have you in the studio with us, to Karl.
Yep. Thanks a lot. Everybody look forward to joining you hopefully in episode 10 again. Cheers.
Wonderful. Thanks a lot. Goodbye.